So, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Resources Committee. If I, for any reason, drop off the connection, Caroline Stewart will take over and chair till I get back reconnected. I'd like to welcome everybody on the call, including those from Scottish Government and HMICS. Before getting into the meeting, I'd like to thank everybody for their cooperation in an earlier start in order that we remain quorate for the discussions this morning. I don't think we have any apologies. Have we any tongue twisted, declarations of interest or connections with anything on the agenda? No. And can we take items 5 to 12 in private, please, for the reasons given on the agenda, foot of the agenda? Thank you. So moving on to section 2, the minutes and actions from the previous meeting. First of all, the minute from the meeting on the 14th of June. Are you all content that that's an accurate record of the discussion? So we can approve that. There's only one item on the action log, which was to do with financial monitoring reporting, and the Q1 report now provides further information about expenditure to date and plans for Q2 as set out in the update and comments. Are we happy to close that item? Okay, thank you. There haven't been any decisions taken since the last meeting. So that takes us on to section 3. Now, I've got in my agenda notes that it's Lynn Brown speaking to this, but there are so many other options. Oh, Patrick, you've got your hand up.
Good morning, Chair. Yes, it's myself who's actually kind of going to present this morning, so apologies about the last minute change, but you okay if I just get underway?
Yes, please do. As with all these reports, we work on the basis that everybody has read them in advance, so it's really just concentrating the things that have either changed since you submitted, the report was submitted, or anything else that you've got to pay particular attention to.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just give a very brief kind of introduction to the report then. So earlier this year, you're aware that the Chief Constable highlighted the impact and challenges facing Police Scotland as a result of the budget settlement which we received from the Scottish Government. And as the committee are aware, we brought before this committee an unprecedented Period 1 financial report to highlight the continued financial challenges that the service is facing. And this Q1 report, which you have before you today, continues to highlight the significant financial pressures that we have, with a forecast outturn for the full financial year of an 18.9 million overspend against our revenue budget. Police Scotland have already taken a number of actions across the service to balance our budget. But as you can see from this forecast, these are not yet meeting the savings targets that we need to achieve this financial year. The pressures are arising simply as outlined in slide 3, with the material financial pressure being police staff costs, police officer overtime, pensions, and the estates being driven by higher utility unit costs, which much of society is facing. The important thing to note is that we do have an agreed plan to bring the spend back in line with budget. But it is important for the committee to note within this plan, hard choices are being taken to deliver effective policing with the revenue budget available. As ever, we will continue to be in ongoing consultation and engagement with our staff representatives and trade union colleagues to ensure that all views are taken into account as we implement this plan to bring us back in line with budget. But we do remain resolute to ensure that we do meet the 3 tests which this board applied to our budget, delivering a balanced budget, prioritising threats and vulnerabilities in Scotland.
I think you've frozen, Patrick.
The good old connection here in Kilmarnock, so I do apologise, but that's all I wanted to say, Chair, and I'll pass it back and I'm happy to take any questions.
Right. Thank you very much, Patrick. And your concluding comments about the 3 key tests that the board apply about a balanced budget are the ones that I was going to emphasise anyway. There's certainly no doubt that we recognise the challenge and we recognise the various options, but we will be discussing some of these options in the private session later in the agenda. But I think it's quite clear that, as with any projected overspend on budget action, it's important to take action at the earliest possible time in the course of this year to give the maximum opportunity to get back in line. The longer you leave it, the worse it becomes. Thank you. Questions, comments from board members, committee members, I mean? Caroline.
Good morning, and thanks, Chair, and thanks, Patrick, for the presentation of the report. And yeah, I think we all appreciate the challenges that are being faced across the service. I think what was interesting for me is when you see where the bright red is on the report, it's majority around overtime, and I think that sort of put to my mind the importance now of having that strategic workforce plan, that plan for what the service looks like, because the more we run hot on that, it means that with less people, we're trying to just do the same that we've always done, and actually we can't do the same that we've always done, and therefore we're going to have to do different things and make different choices. And therefore things like a strategic workforce plan, the estates plan, you know, all of these plans coming together, we should be able to make strategic decisions now about that shape and look of that workforce for the future. Because the more we carry on like this, trying to do everything we've always done for everybody we've always done it for, that's just going to be it's a road to complete and utter disaster. So we need the information to be able to make that strategic information, and part of that's that demand and productivity kind of look. It's about the strategic workforce plan. It's where is demand and how are we going to shape that force for the future? And what are the discussions that we need to be having publicly about what we can and can't do? And we need to start airing some of this, because we can't carry on, because all we're doing at the moment is papering over the cracks, trying to do everything by using overtime as the vehicle to do that. And if we're in flat cash for a period that's consistent going forward, you know, these choices are going to be harder and harder every year. And the longer we take to make the choices, the more retrievable action you've got to take later in the year. So every month we don't do something now, you've got to do almost double to get back on track. So I guess we're going to discuss this, I know, later on, but that would be my overarching thing. And I think my key question is, where are we with some of these plans in terms of getting that? I mean, the demand picture and that strategic workforce plan for me are pivotal for us to be able to make strategic choices. Anyway, thank you. Thanks.
Thanks, Caroline. I'll pass to Alistair first before going back to you, Patrick, if that's all right. Alistair.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. And actually, first of all, thanks to Patrick. Very clear presentation, very clear report. As Caroline has highlighted, it's not come as a surprise. These pressures that you've described so well, Patrick, were known to us, and meeting the priorities of the board, that was known at the outset of the year. And we're going to discuss much of this, and it'll be a theme that runs throughout this whole meeting, actually. So I won't go into too much detail at the moment, but I suppose for me, could you just describe the governance that's going to be put around the difficult choices that you said would have to be made as we go through the year? And just to underscore what Caroline said, I mean, we're in August now. You know, the financial year started in April, and it means that there is a lot to be saved in effectively half the year now. So the governance that are going to be put around those hard choices, and then how that is going to relate to the the key priorities in terms of the budget set by the board at the outset of the year. Thank you.
Thanks, Alistair. Over to you, Patrick.
Thank you, Chair, and first of all, thanks to kind of Alistair for his thanks, but I'm not going to take all praise there. I would like to publicly kind of thank my team for the effort that is going into kind of closely monitoring the financial situation. But in answer to both Alistair and Caroline's kind of points, which I wholeheartedly agree with, the governance structure put around this is the resource prioritisation group, which is chaired by DCC Graham, co-chaired by DCC Graham and DCO Page at the strategic level, which involves all members of the Force Executive. And under that work stream, there are there are a number of work streams which address all these challenges to govern the hard choices. So there is a work stream there. I think, Caroline, it was yourself that mentioned demand. So there is a work stream there looking at how we kind of cope with demand and where we make those kind of choices. Part of that is also the strategic workforce plan and looking at a number of actions, which we'll obviously kind of discuss later in the private session. But that's the governance that's put around Alistair from a strategic level. And in terms of our kind of monitoring, this committee will play a very close role in that. We'll continue to monitor the savings that we put in place and monitor that through our normal finance reports via this committee, but also through the internal governance in Police Scotland around the Corporate Finance and People Board and the Strategic Leadership Board as well.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Can I just pick up on what you just said? I mean, first of all, I'd also like to pass on our thanks, my thanks and everybody else's thanks to your whole team for the clear presentation of these documents. It's been built up by Lynn and others to actually produce a very clear picture, and the graphics save 1,000 words, as it were. But the message is very clear. What I'm want to follow up on is the monitoring of these savings, no matter which ones are agreed. If we were in any other organisation in this situation, we would be having much more frequent reporting back on progress against the plan. I can imagine that there will be all sorts of importance of delegating the actual savings targets against each division or area of activity. And elsewhere, I would have expected to see internally at least weekly monitoring of progress against the plan, because in practical terms, some of these, there'll be a few surprises inevitably that are going to come through. So, and I'm not trying to be a prophet of gloom in this, that it would be a sort of, some bits of it might get worse before they get better as the year progresses. So it's really important to monitor on a weekly basis. And I would think that it would actually be quite appropriate for, say, monthly reporting back to this committee or a subcommittee of the Resources Committee to see how progress is progressing, rather than just waiting for the normal cycle of reporting. I think that is actually going to be important to be able to monitor the achievement of the savings that are being expected. It's as everybody else is saying, we're effectively almost 6 months into the financial year before this gets up and running. It's going to be so important to monitor it very tightly, both within Police Scotland and across to the SPA via this committee.
Thank you, Chair. And obviously, I'm happy to kind of take kind of guidance from you and the information that you require. I'm obviously happy to share the monthly reports. I'm obviously conscious the next Resources Committee, I think, is not until November, if I've read the board schedule correctly. But happy to supply the papers on a monthly basis. I can discuss the kind of monitoring in slightly more detail in the private session. But if I take the example of overtime, at the moment, in your view of, that could get worse before it could better. I've not looked at the month-end figures yet for July. They'll be coming out later today, but I would take the assumption that will be the case. So what we have implemented is an overtime working group, and we are producing weekly overtime reports to continue to monitor that. We are also kind of looking at the churn rate, working very closely with the strategic workforce planning to look at the impact of pay, and we're doing that on a weekly basis at the moment. So, Chair, we have put all of those actions into place within Police Scotland.
Right. Thanks, Patrick. That's very helpful and reassuring. We can discuss out with the public session here just exactly how the most practical way of getting even red, amber, green type reporting against each of the headings, but we can do that separately. Alistair.
Yeah, it's really just continuing that thread of discussion around the overtime. It just strikes me that overtime is a very useful tool. It's something that's clearly being used, you know, to plug any gaps, if that's the right expression, in terms of staffing numbers across the organisation. But it's also used to address unforeseen demand within policing. There's pressures out with the control, clearly, of the organisation. You know, the wider justice system, wider social care systems, all these types of pressure. But I'm a little bit worried, if I'm being honest, if we're 6 months into the year and there's almost a culture of using the overtime to address these challenges. How do you turn it round? It's almost like twice the amount you've got to do because you've only got half the time to do it, and because half the year's gone. How do you turn that around, you know, quickly, so that those that are charged with the very important job of delivering policing across Scotland, policing on the ground, you know, can actually continue to do it without, you know, being able to call upon overtime. There's a big cultural shift, there's a big mindset shift, and there's a big flexibility required, you know, in the way that you use resources. So as the conversations, as that cultural shift, you know, getting down to that frontline manager level, is that taking place already? Because I'm slightly concerned about the turnaround time.
Mm-hmm. Patrick, do you want to respond to that at this stage?
Yes, and I think the kind of DCO would maybe want to come in as well, but just kind of quickly, so I think the kind of culture shift is changing, but we do need to continue to move on that. But I think, Alistair, you highlighted kind of a number of the issues that are actually increasing our overtime, which are out with our control, you know, wider problems and challenges in the justice system in terms of officers being called to give evidence at court on rest days, etc., which is bringing that challenge. It is you know, mental health challenges where officers are kind of being detained in hospital as their shifts end and having to manage that handover kind of amongst officers. And there's been an unprecedented number of operations in the early part of this year which were unplanned and came upon us out with our control urgently, which, you know, raised the overtime perspective as well. So it has been a challenging first quarter. July has obviously been challenging with the Just Stop Oil protests through kind of Grangemouth and the climate camp as well. So those challenges will remain, but I do have confidence that we will bring this back in line across the course of the rest of this year. But I'm aware the DC will want to add some views.
Yes, thanks, Patrick. David, do you want to come in at this stage?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just a couple of comments on, I mean, and Alice's well-made point, actually. One of the issues that we're having to deal with culturally is this is the first time in Police Scotland's history that we've had to reduce the size of the force. And not only have we had to reduce the size of the force, we've had to do it in the face of what we were led to believe was real terms protection. So we were heading in one direction, and then real terms protection was moved, which kind of shifted the game quite fundamentally. As can be seen from press comments from our Federation colleagues, from our ASP colleagues, from our Unison Unite colleagues, there's quite a lot of resistance within the force to not providing the levels of service that are demanded of us. So we, on the finance side, have been providing detailed reporting on overtime since the end of period 1. So this isn't a surprise to us internally. We've been providing an awful lot of detail about it. From a governance perspective, we did put the RPG tactical group in place very early, the RPG strategic group in place. It is, as Alistair had said, it is a really big challenge on the cultural front, because we're having very large meetings with senior leaders where people are getting incredibly frustrated about not being able to help and respond to calls. So, and what we're trying to be very clear, because one of the things I don't want to happen is that this turns into a finance versus operational policing issue. One of the things that we're being very clear, and I'm being very clear, and with my colleagues and the deputies are trying to be very clear with everyone else, is this isn't a finance-led policing mission, if you like. What it is it's the budget envelope that the Scottish Government have given us, and we have to operate within it. Mm-hmm. And the fact that we cannot provide the level of service that we once did is not our choice. It is choice of the government. We have accelerated the level of concern internally about the overspend now over a period of weeks and months, to the point that we've been having very senior, as in all the deputy-led meetings with our ACC chief super colleagues, himself and DCC Graham. I've got a call later on this afternoon with the top 250 leaders across the whole of Scotland to reiterate the fact that we have to operate within the funding envelope provided, even though it's incredibly challenging for those people who want to provide the level of service. And we've got an awful lot of community engagement to do, but it is shifting the culture of Police Scotland from what it has been over the last 10 years in what was really a fairly kind of short, sharp shift from real terms protection, provide this level of service, to squeeze it very hard. And even one of the things that Resources Committee are aware of, and we're acutely aware of this, is we're under this level of pressure at the current time by having to pay a pay award for 23-24 out of our budget this year, with the challenges of providing an appropriate level of fair and affordable pay to our officer and union colleagues. That's going to put even more pressure on the budget this year, and it's going to put even more pressure on the budget next year. And the direction of travel with Scottish Government's direction that we should be absorbing pay pressures within our own organisation, as we've made it incredibly clear, we've done the public sector reform that has been asked of people to generate the savings to allow you to pay your own staff. We have delivered £200 million of savings per annum, which is 2 billion. We've only got around about £200 million of our £1.3 billion budget in non-pay, and that's under huge pressure. So we have nowhere to go other than continuing to reduce the workforce of Police Scotland, which will put further pressure on our ability to deliver policing services across the whole of Scotland. And that runs straight into the point of overtime. Because if you reduce the actual numbers of bodies on the ground, be it in the private, the public, or the virtual space, people run to the overtime, and this is where we're having to press down. So the cultural challenge is immense, and we are working very hard at it. And Alice is absolutely right. The cutting that needs to be done when you've only got 6 months to bring it in is sharper and harder than if we'd have kind of been doing this on day one. But there's a lot of resistance, but we are managing it. We're acutely aware of how people feel about this and the impact on the well-being of those people who are getting incredibly frustrated and not being able to help people where they were in a position where they used to. Thanks. I think it's just important to provide that context.
Yes, David, thank you very much. I think that your comments just now really do summarise the position extremely well and very clearly. I think the bottom line for all of us is that we wouldn't like to be in the funding position we're in, but the reality is if we don't have the cash, we will be unable to pay the overtime and base pay as the year progresses. Like any other organisation, we need the cash to be able to pay our people as well as our suppliers. Caroline, you've been waiting very patiently for a wee while.
No, thank you, Chair, and thanks, David. I think that was very useful indeed commentary. But I think it just underlined to me, and it's building on Alistair's point about the overtime and perhaps not getting that under control within the next few months, because the choices then you have to make are even more sharp and even more awful than they would have been had we been making them in April. So I think it comes back to we've got to do this early, we've got to do it quick, and I think that's what we'll be looking for later on as those commits to how we're going to get there, because you know, and actually how we're going to air the conversations about what we can't do anymore, because that's what we have to start doing. And using that rich picture of the demand picture, the strategic workforce plan, etc., to build that as to how we're going to get there. Thanks.
Thanks, Caroline. Tom.
Thanks very much. And I too found that explanation from David and Patrick very helpful. The only caveat I would put to it is that so for instance, Patrick, court overtime being a major factor, and court overtime has always been a big issue about how, you know, expenditure, uncontrolled expenditure. We talked about big events at the start of the year, but candidly, I don't see them at the start of this year being out with the norm, and, you know, unexpected events occurring and things like that. So the operational causes of this are probably the narrative. We need to have more detail in that. It's more, I mean, there's a fundamental cause of this. And I think you have highlighted it. You know, there's a cultural shift ongoing here. There is the fundamental shift to matching pay award from in-year funding and things like that. So those are probably more relevant than those other factors, because the other factors can turn into anecdote rather than actual evidence.
Thanks, Tom. I mean, I think we all are well aware that you cannot just take the workforce down from 17,234 to broadly 16,500 without having an impact on service. And I'm aware that some time ago there was a reference to the analysis of demand said that 80% of the calls received do not relate to a crime. They're providing other services. So I think there's clearly a challenge for the divisional commanders as to how to deal with all the different challenges they face and live within the financial envelope that's available. As I mentioned earlier, I think the key thing is going to be some effective form of close monitoring of how the savings are being allocated down the line in the organisation and how these are being achieved. And perhaps I know that we have a lot of gold, silver and bronze groups. Perhaps we need a sort of diamond group, if you like, overseeing how this is progressing, so that as things inevitably will unfold over the remaining months of the financial year, that there are appropriate steps being taken to try and actually solve the many operational problems within the financial envelope available. But I know we're going to discuss this in more detail in the private session. So I think at this stage we note and thank Patrick for the very clear presentation of the position to date. Thank David for setting it all in an overall context, which I think is very important that everybody on this call is reminded of. And I think we can at that point move on to the next item on the agenda. Thank you very much. The next item is procurement. And I'm looking to see if, yes, Ian McKee suddenly appeared on the screen. That's great. Ian, welcome to the meeting. This is your annual report. I think you can take it that we have all read the report, so it's really just over to you to highlight anything in particular you wish to draw our attention to.
Thank you. I've just got probably about 11 points just to cover off as briefly as I can. So this is just regulated procurements. It's above £50,000 in value, although procurement deal with anything above £5,000 in contract value. So it's just that differentiation of the context of the report. Some key pieces are, obviously, we review ourselves against our procurement strategy, and the points I would make in there is that we obviously had our new target operating model approved, but subject to the freezes on recruitment, that's never been recruited to. So we've got the model in place, but we won't fully staff that. And then it really feeds into everything you've been talking about in this call. We're kind of looking at how do we support the ever increasing issues with budget and do that efficiently within the team, while still trying to keep compliance and all that sort of, if you like, BAU stuff happening. So as we've talked before in this group, we've really got to become more ingrained with literally every budget holder service. We're well on our way to doing that, but we need to do that more and get further ahead of the curve at all times. So we're kind of almost developing ourselves to meet the need. And we're just about to start our 3-year procurement strategy. We're kind of underway with the plan to do that. And I think that really needs to lay out a new way of looking at things and working and kind of being as strategic as possible, forward planning, kind of blue sky thinking, really pushing harder on demand management, back to your points you've made earlier, Alistair and Patrick. So that's just a kind of overarching sort of change that's going on there. So anyway, just to cover, we've got a TOM in place and it's working well because we've got operations, we cover governance, we've got resilience teams, we've got supply and contract management teams, we've got procurement services teams, which helps with all the purchase to pay and making sure that works really efficiently. So we've got all the right components in place and everything's working, but just not fully resourced, but that's going to be managed. We've now got the ability to develop our own talent, which is really important. We work to national competency matrices for training, and we have that in a full training plan in place for procurement for the next year. We have service planning fully up and running. We've been doing that for about 3 years, but James is driving that harder and making it more defined. So we've got that in place for this year. We are fully engaged with the capital spending, which becomes, so we're doing that earlier and earlier engagement to maximise the opportunity to spend the capital budgets that we do have, and that's obviously really critically important. Savings is a key bit. We're developing really how we capture that so that it's fully ingrained with the budgeting process. But again, we need to be in very early and make sure it's real cash savings that we're capturing, and it's auditable and really means something when we get to the cutting budgets and supporting the saving of other services because of the savings we managed to make. We fully support collaboration across the country. Our policies and procedures are updated every year to stay up to date with best practice and legislation and case law, and all our sourcing strategy documents, which we've been using now for several years, is fully aligned to deal with community wealth, the environment and any sustainability changes and policy notes coming out of Scottish Government. So that's just a round robin of where we've been in the last year. And then the latter part of the report just covers off regulated procurements over the next 2 years. And that always starts as a short list because, for example, this year, when we started the year, we had approximately 60 known re-tenders we had to do. And now we're sitting at something like 200 tenders. And by the end of the year, we're likely to do about 380 to 400 new tender processes. So you find out of a lot of new requirements through the year, and that's the same every year, and that's the bit I'm talking about. We need to try and get us into that, ahead of that curve as possible, to maximise and make those strategic arrangements as strategic as possible to kind of maximise the resource plus the savings. And then just looking at kind of the changes over the last 4 years, we used to have 240 contracts in the contract register. As we stand today, we've got over 600 contracts in the contracts register. We've went from 72% compliance to 97% compliance. And in purchase to pay terms, we went from 28% of requirements being purchased through a recognised process to 74% going through a recognised process. Now, we know we've still a way to go in that, but that's a long cultural challenge, which James has got a team in place for that under Gary Watritt. So we're really driving that, and we are intrinsic to that. So sorry, that's a very brief context and round robin summary.
Ian, thank you very much. No, I think it's very commendable what you've achieved in building up your team and being able to actually do so much more than you were doing when I joined the board some time ago. I think it's transformational. That's what's been achieved, and I think all credit to you and the way in which you've built up your own dedicated team to be able to achieve more and more each year is absolutely first class. Delighted to read this. It's a very good news story, but I don't doubt that with all the practical challenges you face, the number of new tenders you're going to have in the course of this year, it's not an easy ride.
Yeah, and just to say that the team that I have and the support I get from this group, and obviously David and James is absolutely fantastic and would never have happened without it. It's a great team and a great support.
Thanks, Ian, and a very clear, comprehensive report that I know you've only just touched on certain bits of it, but I'd like to thank you for the whole report. Alistair.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, thanks again, Ian. I just echo the Chair's words. Really clear report, and procurement is a good news story within Police Scotland. Real progress is absolutely being made in this area, and that at this time is extremely, extremely important. It's really good to hear this because of the challenges. This is a question that it's kind of slightly out with the report, but it's connected to it. We've got financial challenges. Everybody's got financial challenges. We heard earlier that things like utility bills, as for your average householder, have gone up, considerably. A lot of these things within policing will be tied into longer term contracts. So you've got a degree of certainty about what bills will be, in the short to medium term. But there's also a lot of pressure, I would imagine, on suppliers at this moment in time to maintain these contracts. So what sort of challenges are you facing there around your suppliers and them being able to keep up their end of a contract? And how much time and effort does that take for your team, to manage these live contracts as we go forward?
Yeah, so the challenge is increasing all the time. So we have two of our large providers challenging us at the moment. One officially and one that sort of starts as just a debate and then it becomes an official process. So we are finding this is a more regular approach to put pressure on for increases. And for us, we absolutely need to stick to the contractual terms and not veer from those, regardless of what seems a nice thing to do. Because as soon as you enter that kind of pattern in a business, you open that door for every provider out there, and so it's a tough line, and yeah, it can challenge relationships. But in response, so yes, there's more of that coming our way. But in response to that, we have created a supplier and contract management team. So what we did was we just used to have a group of people doing tenders and jack of all trades. We took some of the resources out of that and applied it, reduced the size of that team, but applied it to specifics to really, and what this is all about is to really add value through more closely managing the current contracts. So being aware of those challenges, aware of what's coming up, aware of the markets, the cycles, the labour cycles, impacts on the supply chain, but have more time to work with them. And again, I talk about this kind of keeping ahead of the curve and being prepared for those approaches, but having our sort of working with legal who support us a lot now in many of these areas and have supported us greatly. And we work with them and kind of ensure we're keeping people in a position where they understand where they sit contractually, but they understand why we're doing what we are doing. And then we're having to get tighter in our terms of contracts when we tender, so that we are covering off those challenges where we at least have some assurance around the values of our costs. But in addition, we are not putting businesses out of business. So we also have to have that in there and be considering the size of the businesses, where the locations of the businesses. So it's a balance to tick a lot of boxes. So we want businesses to grow, businesses to make profit, but not profiteer. And we need to hold them to that in many instances. So we're trying to set ourselves up, be in the right position for that, be tight contractually, keep conversations going, and that's a market that is, for want of a better phrase, is growing. And if it's okay to pass over, there's other two hands up with DCO and CEO.
Yes. Thanks very much, Ian. Alistair, do you want to come back on that before I bring David Page?
Just very quickly, no, and appreciate the response and the explanation there. And you've got a target operating model that, for reasons that have already been explained, have not quite been able to fill. But what you've also explained there is the agility that you must maintain within the team. So I just wanted to draw that point out as well, and make sure that we were all clear on that. That was the only additional point. Thank you, Chair.
Right. Thanks, Alistair. David.
Thanks, Chair. Just wanted to echo a couple of the points that board members have made and add a little bit of other context. I mean, the improvements in procurement, as you've already commented, going back 5-6 years, where we had walls of red audit findings about non-compliant spend, about NCAs, about wasted money. The way the procurement function was operating hindered our ability to spend capital. As we've already discussed, on our capital spend, we're spending money much earlier. One of the key things to that is the procurement team. Having much more compliance in those areas has been absolutely critical for us in terms of getting the best value from every one of the kind of public pounds we spend. One of the things that's really, really important to emphasise is the importance of having the right civilian staff with the right skills in the right jobs and allowing them to do those jobs. One of the risks of the current environment where we're pressing down on the workforce is effectively you get this, we've got to focus on operational colleagues, and we'll take the axe to the kind of the corporate less operational areas. We've talking again with my colleagues, we're aware of the risks of going back to where we were 10 years ago, which is effectively a culling of the civilian staff and the expertise that those civilian staff bring. Ian's team, for example, all of the stuff we've done in change, all of the stuff we've done in policing, all of these civilian capabilities are enabling capabilities. And if we decimate the civilian staff in these key roles, either we start to become non-compliant, we start to waste money, we don't look after well-being as well as we should do. And the one thing that we really do need to resist, and my operational colleagues, the deputies, we've been really strong at emphasising, is we can't go back to a position where operational policing colleagues find themselves being put into civilian jobs. It's a completely inappropriate use of resource. It's more expensive than the kind of the civilian staff, and it's not as effective. So a risk that we're actively managing at the current time when we're reducing the workforce is having built up real capability to look after a £1.3 billion budget in the civilian skill set, is because of it's the civilians, not the police. We don't decimate it. So it's got to be a really measured reduction of the workforce. And going back to one of the points earlier that board colleagues made, it's about the strategic workforce plan. It's about making sure that as we shrink the organisation, we don't lose sight of the fact that it has to be a balanced organisation with the right mix of civilian staff and civilian expertise to support those frontline operational policing and civilian staff that work on the front line. So I just wanted to flag that risk because it's a risk that is real, and it's really important that we as an organisation don't lose the balance of the workforce. Thank you.
Thanks, David. I completely agree with what you've been saying, and you can't just say that in any event, if we're short of police officers, that we can take them off some of the key operational duties to take on some administrative or backroom posts that they're not really trained to do. It is counterproductive on every front. Caroline.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, David. Actually, you've just raised most of the points I was going to actually bring up. And Ian, I wanted to say thank you. I think Grant and I have been on this journey with you really since the beginning, and what a turnaround that as been made to procurement. So I just want to say well done, because we have seen that come to life, and it's now really a sort of professional procurement organisation running very efficiently and effectively. So well done to you. And really just to pick up on David's point, and this underlines the whole point about the strategic workforce plan. And one of the points that we discussed very clearly last year when the topic of flat cash was first kind of mooted, is that we must not lose that sort of pay to non-pay kind of proportion, because a business requires the same level, and therefore having a strategic way of planning that, and using professional skills in police staff is hugely important to that. And that's why these planks are absolutely vital, because the more that we don't do this, the more we're going to end up making slash and burn decisions because they're expedient to get money out of the organisation right away. And you'll end up with strategic gaps we'd rather we hadn't had, but it's because you haven't been able to strategically plan for the way that your organisation would be shaped. And that's why this whole conversation this morning is so vitally important. And I think, you know, as Grant said, that sort of increased monitoring, I think part of that has to be looking at these key planks as well and starting to build up a real strategic picture about what does policing look like going forward, and what kind of shape are we going to be in, and what needs to be maintained, and what are the things that are probably up for discussion about not being maintained. So I just want to say well done, Ian. I agree totally that keeping these professional services going is absolutely vital to going forward, but unless we have some clear tools at our disposal to make these strategic decisions, we will be slashing and burning in the wrong places. Thanks.
Thanks, Caroline. Completely agree with your comments, and I think they fit very clearly in with the comments that David Page has been making in the last few minutes. So, any comments? Oh, Tom, yes.
Thanks, Ian. I agree with everything that's been said, and particularly the areas around making sure that you maintain the strategic resources capable of taking us forward in these challenging times. But on that point, it was reported to us that you'd completed a best value toolkit for procurement, and obviously this is the last strategy, the last year of this strategy. So in your own sense, is it a sense yet of what next?
What next is kind of almost being carved out with what's ahead of us, and it is very much that my team needs to be agile and mobile. I mean, we're already moving people about, if I'm being honest. We've just done a review of our target operating model to say, does it work? And yes, it does, but it can't stop moving. Is kind of where I'm at now, and we've got all the right components, but we're just kind of moving the focus and priority as we go. So what next is very much is what I laid out is really we do need to remain strong in the supplier and contract management space. We need to remain strong in the contract space as we enter ever more turbulent times, but we need to be adding value wherever we can is probably where I'm sitting at the top, and all of those things I talked about do add value at the top, but we've got to be adding value to the contracts that we put in place. We're trying to put longer term contracts in place and get more value and squeeze as much as we can out of those, whilst not impacting business in Scotland. So we're balancing a lot of things, but the priority is to get the add value, so we're putting as much back into this business as we possibly can to protect the services that we're here to deliver. That's definitely what I'm about.
I mean, that's wholly sensible, and particularly the bit about agility. Is there any particular areas that are preventing agility for you, that are real frustrations for us, so we can look at that?
But probably not. I'm finding that everybody we work with really wants to do that job. It's actually probably more about my team making sure we work with that the right way for that type of service. That's probably more my challenge and other areas' challenge. I would say they're there to do that job. I'm here to do this job, and my team's here to do it. So we want to merge with you, the service, and so know that there's nobody preventing us. It's with our own will, and we need to do as best we can.
That's hugely encouraging. Thanks very much.
Yes. Thanks, Tom. Ian, I think you have picked up from all the comments that we're all delighted at the progress you've made in procurement in the course of the past year. But going further back, as Caroline mentioned, that it's been quite a journey, but it's great to actually see the demonstrable benefits coming through of having the right people doing the right things. And I think the comments about ensuring in the strategic workforce planning that we continue to have the right people doing the right jobs is so important.
Yeah, I'll pass on to the team. Thank you very, very much.
Right, thank you. We're asked to approve this procurement annual report. Are we happy to do so? Yep. Right. Thank you very much, Ian, and do pass on our thanks and good wishes to everybody in your team. Thank you. Right. That brings us to the end of the public session. We'll pause briefly until Debs, you can tell us we can proceed into the private section.